Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. Okay, so if I was to ask you, describe a British rock and roll star, what would you say? Maybe long greasy hair, sparkly jumpsuit, prancing around with an electric guitar on an exploding stage? Yeah, me too. And I kind of thought, where does this image come from? So I started doing a little bit of research and I found out that actually I'm asking the wrong question, and I should be asking, would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone? Let's find out. So let's transport back to the early 60s when 5 London lads are causing absolute chaos on the London music scene. And you see, the 50s had been quite an oppressive time. The government had to try and get the women out of work and back into the home, so they made a campaign to show the benefits of living in a traditional Christian British family home, and everything was very straight, white, polite and polished. Meanwhile, two friends, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, searched further afield for something a bit more exciting, and they both had a passion for Black American country music, which later evolved into rhythm and blues, and they went to great lengths to find new artists, new records, and to learn about the culture. Aspiring drummer Charlie Watts had a passion for jazz, and he taught himself to play on a makeshift drum as he frequented the London underground scene and taught himself how to hold a beat. Brian Jones had been musical from a very young age, and he collided with these characters in the London music scene. Later, they would recruit Bill Wyman, a bassist, and they jammed together and formed a band which they named the Rolling Stones. And when the band started playing London venues, their audience grew quicker than anyone had anticipated. On the first night, they had about 80 people, but by the third night, there was queues around the block to see them. Their music was swirly, and like a wave, it caught the audience attention and pulled them in. It was very clever, as each of the instruments would kind of play at a slightly different beat, which gave it excitement, like it could all go wrong at any moment. And Mick Jagger was this amazing frontman. He was very animalistic, he had voluptuous lips, and he thrusted around on stage and made the girls literally piddle their pants. The band's catchy rock and roll riffs really excited the teenage fans who were dissatisfied with the older generation who were completely ruling their lives. They caught the attention of music producer Andrew Oldham, who managed the band from 1963 to 1967, and he saw these guys as the anti-Beatles, and he encouraged them to be bad boys and to have this anti-establishment rhetoric. And so on stage, the band ramped up their bad behaviour, and this saw the fans becoming unruly and chaotic. The girls would claw at Mick Jagger while he was on the stage, wanting to devour his sensual energy. And the guys came for a riot and a good fight with the police because they were so angry at how they were being treated. So the band was really popular, but there was a bit of a problem because they'd only ever released cover songs, and Keith wasn't really satisfied with this. He wanted the challenge of writing their own music. So Mick and Keith sat down and they began writing experimentally, and they didn't think their songs were very good. They thought they were rubbish, but they took the time to get feedback from their audience so that they could improve their writing. And their first hit hit was Tell Me, which gave them kind of energy to keep going in their pursuits of writing great material. Satisfaction was released in 1965, and this was a life-changing moment for the band. This was a massive, massive hit. It really struck a chord with teenagers who understood this feeling of dissatisfaction as they didn't want to just slot into the routines of the older generation. And of course, this meant that parents absolutely hated them, and the media loved this, and they started printing stories about how they were Neanderthals and yobs and ugly, they had fleas, anything you could think of. And the band reacted to this by being very dismissive and rude when in interviews. And this mutual disrespect between the band and the tabloids led to the News of the World leaking a story to the police about the band having a rug party. And when the police actually came to invade Keith Richards' home, the band were on LSD and strung out, and so Mick and Keith were both arrested on possession of rug charges. And they faced big sentences of up to 10 years, and they actually were convicted, and people speculate that this is because in court Keith Richards was quite cheeky to the judge, and he told them that he didn't care about the judge's petty morals. So he was given a harsh sentence of 1 year in Wormwood Scrubs, which is a notoriously horrible prison, and Mick was given 3 months in Brixton Prison. But this actually went to the Two's advantage because fans really felt sympathy for the Two. They felt that they were targeted specifically for being in the Rolling Stones. And the court judgment was overthrown. They were both released, and they had a better connection with their fans than ever before. In 1968, they released the very controversial hit, Sympathy for the Devil, and this was absolutely hated by a Christian British society who labelled the band as demonic. But the band actually were trying to make a point about the instability of the world, as there was a lot of warmongering going on and everyone felt on edge that another war could erupt at any minute. So the band's lifestyle was just constantly chaotic, and sadly Brian Jones just didn't cope well with this kind of lifestyle, and he had a really crippling heroin addiction, and he couldn't play with the band anymore. He had nothing to contribute except for every now and again there would be a little moment of genius and he would make a beautiful riff for the songs. One of them you can hear on the song Great Expectations. So the rest of the band, they went to visit Brian and they kind of said, it's not working out, you're not fit enough to play anymore. And Brian held his hands up because he knew that that was the truth. But 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his swimming pool, and the band just regret that they couldn't help him anymore or save him from himself. 2 days after his death, they had already planned a big concert in Hyde Park, and this meant that they could use this as the unofficial funeral for Brian, and 500,000 people attended in his memory. So to forget about everything, the band decided to tour America with their new guitarist, Mick Taylor, who Keith Richards describes as a virtuoso. He was very, very talented, and the band sounded better than ever. And after a successful tour, they decided to record some of their biggest hits like Wild Horses. And whilst they were recording, somebody suggested, let's go and play this free concert, because that was the trend of the time, free love and giving back to society. So they decided to go to San Francisco for this free gig. But as soon as they arrived to this gig, they realised that this was not normal. It was completely out of control. And the security were the Hells Angels, but they had been taking a lot of drugs and acid. And this meant that they were wired and just kind of looking for a fight. And the band could see people pushing each other around and really starting to get violent, and they tried to kind of calm things down. Mick was at the front of the stage. He was like, cool it, you know, trying to be calm, trying to gain some respect, but there was nothing they could do, and they couldn't escape because they were surrounded by an angry crowd. So they tried to carry on playing and try and calm things down. But unfortunately, there was a murder in the audience as somebody was stabbed and kicked to death by the Hells Angels because they suspected they had a gun. And this caused the band massive issues with the press again, because they blamed the band for this dangerous incident, and they'd also not paid their tax in Britain, so they had to elope to the south of France so they could earn the money to pay off their debts. And while they were in the south of France, this is when we see the style of the hedonistic 70s rock and roll style really develop. So there were celebrities everywhere, they were all strung out on rugs, and it was taking them 2 weeks to write a song that would usually take 2 days. And here's where we mix kind of the glamour with the filth of rock and roll. But there was an exception in the band, and this was Charlie Watts. He was kind of like your typical introvert, and he liked cleanliness, he liked order, he was happily married, and he never really understood why he was a Rolling Stone, because he loved the band and the music, but he didn't really fit into the lifestyle. And they just wrote music all night and partied hard until 1974, when they're at a party and Mick Taylor just casually tells Mick Jagger that he's leaving the band, and they kind of felt like he was bored of them because he was so talented as a musician, but actually he was really scared of the effects that drugs were having on his family. And as a twist of fate would have it, there was someone else that heard this conversation, and that person was the lead guitarist of the Faces, Ronnie Wood. And the Rolling Stones really loved Ronnie Wood. They loved his band and they loved his musical style and ability. And they'd played together many times. They were jamming together, they'd recorded together. So he just seemed like an instant replacement for Mick Taylor. And Ronnie Wood brought something different to the band. He was fun, he was colourful, he was theatrical, he was playful, and that took them away from this kind of dangerous demonic image that had been damaging them in the press. So by the late 70s, the band had decided to clean up their act just a little bit. So they started focusing their energy on their stage shows, and they were really into art and design, and they wanted to make a spectacle, and this was really popular with their fans because they'd never seen anything like this before. And actually Keith Richards did well in this period because he managed to quit drugs in 1978, and this happened after a very unfortunate incident where he actually tried to take Class A's through Canadian customs, and the penalty for this is absolutely massive. The Canadian government just won't have it at all, so they were going to put him in prison for life, but he was actually spared because he had started therapy for his drug addiction, and the judge saw that as a really good step in the right direction, and he just told him that he had to play a free concert for the Canadian Institute of the Blind. And the group are still touring to this day, and they're all in their 70s, but they still love the rock and roll lifestyle, but just maybe at a bit more of a relaxed pace. And sadly, in 1993, Bill Wyman decided to leave the band, and in 2021, Charlie Watts actually passed away. And this is just really, really tragic for the band and for the fans because They've been together since they were teenage boys and they started a teenage revolution together. So I can't imagine the pain of their loss. But the question remains, would I let my daughter marry a Rolling Stone? I don't think I'd get a choice, do you? And they went to great lengths to indulge this passion. I'm so passionate about you.